Hello, friends, and welcome to Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and help you engage with public policy in the great state of Texas. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and today we're excited to introduce Texas Impact's legislative agenda with our very own Executive Director, B. Moorhead. You'll remember a few weeks ago that we had 3 board members join the program at the conclusion of a 3-day board retreat to talk about that process. And in the weeks that followed, all of the magic wordsmithing and voting took place to ensure that there was consensus on the final product. And today, B will join us to talk about where the board landed and what our listeners can do with this legislative agenda. We're not going to go through the entire document bullet by bullet, so I hope you'll check out the full document on the website at texasimpact.org, which is also a good opportunity to remind everyone that this legislative agenda is ambitious. And if even half of it were to become law, it would transform millions of lives. But that can't and won't happen without Texans of faith taking our responsibility seriously to engage in the process, to organize our communities, to meet with our elected representatives, and finally, and most important in this season of the legislative calendar, to make sure our communities are organizing to elect representatives that share our values. Texas Impact has tools for all of that, so I hope you'll go to texasimpact.org and check out the Legislative Action Center for ways you can get involved. And then check out our Texas Faith Votes page for tools and resources to help people in your congregation and community vote. Now is the time, y'all. If you have questions about any of it, please shoot me an email at scott@texasimpact.org. All right, back to the agenda. Y'all, I love this process, and I love watching a board full of committed faith leaders discerning and discussing public policy. So let's get to it. I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with Texas Impact's Executive Director, B. Moorhead. Joining us for today's conversation is Texas Impact's Executive Director, B. Moorhead, who has nothing at all in the world going on these days. B, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
It's been a fun few weeks. I assume you've just caught up on beauty rest and done all the things. Is that?
Oh, yeah. Just little light housekeeping, stuff like that.
Yeah, nothing going on in the world. But one of the really exciting things that did happen in the world over the course of the last few weeks is the Texas Impact Board got together for Sunday through Tuesday gathering in Austin and did some really great work on a new set of legislative priorities. I will say, I've said this to groups over the course of the years. I love watching the Texas Impact Board coming up with these priorities because it seems like it's democracy at its finest. But talk to us about that process. What's it look like when the Texas Impact Board gets together to determine these legislative priorities?
Well, first of all, it looks like a big room full of people, and I think it's important for people to understand that this is a consensus agenda. They make it together, and there's 43 of them. So, they are having a full-blown conversation about policy issues that are, in some cases, really thorny, that legislators are debating, and I'm just so impressed with them, I guess. I'm just so impressed with the level of insight and analysis and theology and heart that they bring to the process.
Those were some really deep conversations, especially when they broke out into small groups with people from different faith backgrounds, different traditions, listening in on some of those conversations to the really intentional work of listening and consensus building is pretty fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely it is. So just to answer your question, how does the process go, though? So it starts, weeks earlier, months earlier. The Texas Impact staff starts accumulating information and puts together kind of a draft suggested, almost like a shopping list. Like, this is what likely you're going to want to include. Here's some things you might want to include. And then when the board gets together, they discuss those issues. And in particular, they bring in theological framing and reference to their own social principles, social teachings, and kind of get them fleshed out and consistent in a way that will reflect this particular interfaith body's paradigm for this session.
And one of the things I had a chance to present these legislative priorities to a group in Houston at Resurrection MCC this last weekend. And one of the things I ask, you've heard me do the riff probably 100 times, that I just poll the congregation. What percent of the vote do you think the board would have to approve these items? And somebody will immediately say 51%, and then somebody will say 2/3 or 75%, and I make fun of them for suggesting that's really high before finally spoiling it that it's 100%, and the room gasps. Why do you think it's so important that these legislative priorities are consensus driven, are unanimously adopted by the board? What kind of value does that give to the final product?
Oh gosh, well, I mean, from an advocacy standpoint, from the staff's standpoint, it makes a huge difference to be able to say every one of our board members representing all of the traditions that participate all said yes, versus a lot of our guys thought this was a good idea, right? From their standpoint, it helps every one of those judicatories or religious institutions that participates in Texas Impact at least feel like they count as much as everybody else. You can easily see how if we had an issue where there was one of the member denominational bodies that said this is just not something that we can support, we're going to have to step back on this, that they would feel in some way like, so since you did it anyway, I guess our opinion just doesn't matter that much, right? So this is a way of affirming that everybody's voice matters. And I think particularly like on the contentious stuff, like when we started talking about the abortion issue after the Dobbs decision, the board's rigor in making sure that everybody can get there is what gives it that heft. I mean, look, every one of the people who participates in the Texas Impact Board comes from a tradition that has its own social principles or teachings or whatever they call it. They take positions at the national and sometimes at the state level legislatively already. So this is not an agenda that is like the sum total of all of everything everybody says all kind of dumped in there together and stirred around. This is more like the refinement of all of the things everybody says. We've picked out all the parts that are not things everyone can agree to. And just to put a fine point on that, you know this, Scott, I mean, there have been issues where they did not take a position. Famously, one of them was, in fact, topic you and I were just talking about, the death penalty, where the board endorsed a moratorium on the death penalty, but did not endorse legislation abolishing the death penalty, because at that time when they took that position, not all of those denominational bodies did endorse abolition, and they may not still.
You have been at this for a while. I don't want to, this isn't like an age joke or anything.
Since the Earth's
y'all stop laughing.
Yeah.
But you have been through this process, I was trying to figure it out, maybe a dozen times in this position.
Yeah, that's fair, yeah.
Yeah, so how's it changed over time?
Well, one, the board is bigger than it used to be. And that is not, that is because participation by the faith communities in the state has grown, and because the interest in being on the board has grown, right? So, it's a big, strong board full of people who really want to be on it at this point. And it's not, this, when we say the board, this is not the representation of a board that's a corporate board that's doing corporate business and, just tending to legal stuff. These people are the policy board of the organization. They're the people who are appointed mostly by their own faith tradition to come and robustly represent that position in our legislative work. So back, when I first started, there were not nearly as many of them, and they they were not as good at policy, Scott. I mean, I'm just going to say it. I've loved every member of every board the whole time I've been in this job.
Some more than others.
No, I love everybody, but I feel like we have just an amazing crop of board members right now, but also that our board have as a group really invested in becoming policy experts. There are board members on the Texas Impact Board today who have been on for a long time who have really bothered to become experts in tough policy issues. You know, the way the grid works, how Medicaid works, the things where people go to graduate school like you and I didn't expect to spend their whole life working at a desk understanding this thing. So they are better and better at the policy side. And, I think our denominations have changed, right? I mean, your denomination certainly has gone through a big change just recently.
I have a podcast about that from a few weeks ago. You can go
I remember that. That's true. But many of our denominations, my Presbyterian Church USA similarly went through a big change. And generally when that has happened, it has been clarifying for the policy positions of the denomination. And that has therefore clarified for our board members how they might imagine approaching controversial policy issues from their own tradition.
I'd also say probably it's gotten a lot more substantive, a lot longer than it used to be in the early days, right? Is that true?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. It's much longer than it used to be. And part of the reason for that is, and I would give the staff credit for this. I think the staff has imposed a discipline of 3 characteristics that we insist the legislative agenda needs to have. The first is that it be a consensus agenda. The second is that the items on it be legislatively actionable. And I'll come back and say what that is. And the third is that they be legislatively live. So you could think of that legislatively live piece as in some ways being kind of a limiter. So if it's something that is not going to be considered either because there's no political will or because it's not relevant right now, that maybe takes some things off the table. But the legislatively actionable actually kind of ends up making it longer because once upon a time, Texas Impact's mandate was issues of poverty, peace, and justice. Well, that is really fast to say, and that is a big neighborhood, but not precisely legislatively actionable in any way, right? I mean, it either is or is not every single thing there is to say about our shared faiths. Legislatively actionable is, let's start with poverty. Whether people have enough to eat, whether they have health care, whether every child goes to a school that prepares them for life in the community, whether everybody has shelter, whether everyone can get a job, right? Each of those things, and when you unpack those things, there's sub-pieces within them. So the legislatively actionable part ends up being details of details of details. And I mean, policy doesn't all get done at one time. So the things that are important this legislative session, the legislatively actionable things, are not necessarily what was legislatively actionable a couple of years ago or what will be in the future. Maternal mortality, let's take that, maternal health care as a really good example. Anybody who wants to have a legislative item calling for 12 months of continuous Medicaid eligibility postpartum this session is literally a day late and a dollar short because we passed that bill last time. But anybody who wants to improve maternal health care in Texas, we are just getting warmed up.
Got some work to do. Yeah. Well, we've talked a lot about process. I know folks are anxious to hear what's in the legislative priorities. And spoiler to those who are listening, we're not going to go through every bullet on here. You can go to our website for that, texasimpact.org. Check out the entire legislative agenda there. But let's talk about some of the high points. We do have 4 bullet points, or 4 categories in the legislative agenda. Talk to us about those.
So some years ago, we came up with this framework, and I think it's held up. There's a pretty comprehensive approach to what the interfaith paradigm for policy might be. And what we said is there's economic justice, which is a very big neighborhood, right? They're all big neighborhoods, but economic justice is everything from health and welfare to education to workforce and housing. So it's a lot of stuff. But it has to do with the basic way we distribute resources in the community. The second one is climate justice, also a big neighborhood. Climate justice is everything to do with energy, the natural world around us. In some cases, there's crossover with immigration around climate. In some cases, there's crossover with health. So we see a lot of times that these issues aren't cleanly only one thing or another. Right? But so climate justice is the second one. The third one is human rights. Also, very expansive topic that includes everything from immigration and gender equity, so issues of discrimination, racial justice, to law enforcement and voting rights and any of those issues. And then the last one is civic participation. And civic participation is not just an issue that has to do with whether people vote or not. It also has to do with the broad processes of government. So do we have open meetings? Do we have transparency in government? So those are all civic participation issues.
The categories have stayed consistent over at least the last couple bienniums. But is there anything, and many of the topics, many of the bullet points would be similar to previous legislative sessions. Is there anything that the board grappled over this time and added that's substantively different than last session?
I want to say there are not completely new issues that had never been thought of before this time, the way that there were last time.
Right.
The way that there was last time when we added abortion and reproductive issues, which had never been on our agenda before. It's more an issue of what gets the attention, what gets the most focus. And I would highlight, I guess, on the negative side, that we have a topic. We used a word that I don't remember using in this legislative agenda before, and that is persecution. That we are referring specifically to various kinds of persecution over religion and political persuasions, gender identity, that in the past we've kind of not named all of those things one common name, and we have used the word persecution to describe them. On the positive side, and where I would really love for Weekly Witness listeners to spend a minute thinking, is we have a subset of this agenda that we're referring to as a flourishing families agenda. We know that this upcoming session is likely to be rough. We understand that there is political turmoil in the world, and it's not Texas is not immune to it. But we also know that Texans of faith and other Texans are fundamentally hopeful people and expect legislators to move our state forward. So to that end, we need to have an agenda of what it would look like to move forward, not just what are we mad about, right? So we have a set of issues that we've worked on with colleagues from other organizations on what would be a moving forward agenda. And those include things like adding funding for daycare so that more families can get high quality early childhood care so that they can work and be self-sufficient. Making sure that it's convenient and accessible for families to get their kids the benefits they're supposed to get, Medicaid and CHIP and food assistance. Creating some new innovative ways for the faith community to help unhoused Texans. Right now, we've got colleagues in other states who have been working with their state and local governments to increase the opportunities for congregations to use faith property, faith-owned property to create affordable housing. We think that'd be a great thing here. We certainly need it. So there's several issues that are moving Texas forward, and I think the sooner that we're able to help lawmakers and the public focus on the things we want in the future, the easier it will be to get out of the mire that we're in of politicization of every single social issue.
I think I don't think, I know the board and the staff know our homework assignment, right? That this set of legislative priorities, this legislative agenda is going to guide our work over the course of the next 2 years. The board did some great work and we're excited to help move this forward. We're going to be working with our teams, our issue champions, the staff. This document's going to guide a lot of the work, if not all of the work that we do over the course of the next 2 years. But I think the question is, what do you hope listeners will do? What do you hope listeners will do with this legislative agenda? What do you hope congregations, what do you hope faith leaders will do? What's the external work that needs to happen with these legislative priorities?
Well, I hardly know where to start. And I guess when you said that, so one of our board members earlier today stopped a conversation that was ongoing to say he thought I was good at thinking of metaphors. So I guess that's
true. I'll go with that. Yeah.
Well, I'd say in this case, I hope that our listeners will treat this legislative agenda the way that I treat a cookbook. When I get a cookbook, I don't read it cover to cover and then try to figure out how to cook every single recipe in it on the first day, right? That is a recipe for failure. Instead, I thumb through it and I say, this is the part for me. This is the part that resonates with me. I know if I was going to cook something, I'd start by saying, well, I know I already have most of this stuff at my house, right? So if I'm reading this legislative agenda, I'm thinking, I already have most of this stuff in my heart, right? I've already had the experiences that gave me insight into what my community needs here. I already know people that this is an actual issue for them. Maybe it's an issue for me in my own life. I already have worked on this issue before, and I have 3 friends who do too, so I've already got myself a community. I would start there and figure out what is the 1 or 2 things that I'm going to really commit myself to. And then, so I also don't get a cookbook and find those few recipes that look like they're really good and rip them out and throw the rest of the cookbook away, right? I don't say, well, this is the only things I'll ever need out of here. Instead, every every little while I go back and I look through it, and sometimes I'll say, I forgot. I now have that item and I didn't used to, and I was just wondering what I should do with it. In that same way, you want to always be thinking, times change, I change, the world around me changes. I want to always be thinking about what are the issues that resonate with me today that I may have not known about before, that now it turns out I'm in a great position to say something about. When I was a parent with young children, I may have been all fired up about public school and daycare and that stuff. And my kids got older and I didn't have a direct connection to it. And I started to think, I don't know what everybody's so. I didn't personally. I know why people are wound up. But I just want to say, and then at some point you start thinking, well, there's a whole different set of issues that I'm encountering. I shouldn't assume that I can't change and grow. That's what I want my whole state to do, change and grow. And I can help.
I would also like for the state to change and grow. And I know that all of our listeners are going to help move Texas forward with this agenda. Any other closing thoughts or plugs you want to leave us with today? I won't call them shameless when it's you. You can plug whatever you want.
No matter what issue is interesting to you, no matter what ingredients are in your pantry, it starts with relationships. It starts with building legislative relationships and building relationships in your community. You want to be somebody who's fundamentally connecting people and ideas, and you want to be the one who can go to your legislator and say, I understand you're interested in a thing. I'm interested in it too, and this is my friend, and they have something to tell you. That's the role we want all of our folks to be able to do, is to be that fundamental connector in the community. So spend your time. If you had a choice between listening to Scott's Weekly Witness and any other activity, always listen to Weekly Witness first. But if it's something between meeting with your legislator and watching the news or reading an article or going to that one more event and getting fired up or whatever, meet with your legislator. Have a 10-minute conversation, a 5-minute conversation with them and their staff. You'll be different and they'll be different. Now you got a place to start.
Well, and not just your legislator. I think you said it earlier. Meet with your community, meet with other humans in your community. We've become consumers of content and not relationship builders.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's a good closing word, is to make some friends this election season as we move into legislative session. Make some friends who enjoy this work with you, build those relationships, have the conversations, and let's do this work together.
Couldn't say it better myself.
Well, you could, but I'll take the last word today. How about that? All right, B, appreciate the time. Thanks for all you do. I'm looking forward to everyone reading this legislative agenda and then letting us know how it's going.
Thanks, Scott.
I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with B, and I hope you spent some time looking over the legislative agenda and that you share it with a friend. More, I hope you'll take some time to check out all of the opportunities to engage in the work necessary to make these ambitious agenda items come to life here in the great state of Texas. We talked in the open about those opportunities. Join a team, become an issue champion, use the Texas Faith Votes resources. You can find those and so much more at texasimpact.org. While you're there, I hope you'll take a moment to sign up to be a member of Texas Impact. Your membership supports this podcast and all of the work to engage Texans of faith to advocate for a more just and equitable Texas. If you have questions about any of it, please reach out. You can reach me at scott@texasimpact.org. And with that, I think it's time to close out this episode. So remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Attinen, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.